Hello everyone, welcome to our institution of Global Professional Free International webinar in IGP platform. Thank you all for joining and make this session wonderful. Before we have completed our 422 webinar, today I will be presenting webinar number 423 and the topic is quantitative research method in educational research. Before that, it's my humble request to you that you stay with us till end and don't forget to like, share and mention your friend. So let's together and learn together. Today we have a speaker from Philippines. He is a researcher and master teacher at Malay National High School. Let's welcome our speaker to the screen. Hello sir, good evening.
Good evening, sir, and welcome or good evening to everyone. Shall I start now, sir?
Thank you sir. Just share your screen please.
All right, so sorry, just a moment. Can you see my slide now, sir?
No sir.
Just a moment. Let me check. Okay. How about this time, sir?
Yes sir, it's now visible.
All right,
Let's
can you see
start
my
your
slide?
presentation.
All right. So, so once again, thank you very much for introducing me, sir. First and foremost, I would like to express my heartfelt gratitude to IGP or the Institution of Global Professionals for giving me the opportunity to be one of the resource speakers in this program. So where I should be able to share some insights with professionals as well as to some students across the globe. So once again, I would like to greet this in our own in my language. Maraming salamat po. So tonight, the topic that I will be sharing to you is entitled the quantitative research methods in educational research. My name is Sharon P. Batilantes, Master Teacher 1 from Malay National High School, District of Malay, Schools Division Office of Aklan, Region 6, Western Visayas, Philippines. And here are my objectives. At the end of this presentation, the participants are expected to, number one, define what is educational research. Number two, differentiate the quantitative research from qualitative research. Number three, distinguish the context of research methodology between the context of the research methods. And number four, familiarize with the components of the quantitative research methods in educational research. So first, we have here a question saying, what is educational research? Do you have any idea? So the term educational research actually refers to the systematic gathering and analysis of data in the field of education. Research may employ a variety of methods and concentrate on a variety of aspects of education, including students' learning, teaching methods, training of teachers, and classroom dynamics. Next, in educational research, actually we have two types of research, the quantitative research and the qualitative research. But how do we differ from each other? So I have here a table showing their differences. The first one is focus. In quantitative research, it talks more about quantity, such as how much or numbers, while in qualitative research is more on quality, like features, attributes, and so on. For the epistemology actually is the study of the nature and scope of knowledge and justify belief. It analyzes the nature of knowledge and how it relates to similar notions such as truth, belief, and justification. So here, the epistemology of a quantitative research is more on objectivism, while in a qualitative research, it's more on constructionism and subjectivism. The next one is the theoretical perspective, or sometimes it was called as theoretical research perspective. And what is that all about? A theoretical perspective is more on theory, all right? And it's not just an idea that someone has. So rather, it is a structural framework, explanation, or tool that has been tested and evaluated over time. So theories are developed and utilized via scholarship, research, discussion, and debate. So theories help us to understand the world in general, and in this instance, the ways in which families form, function, interact with, and experience the world. So here, in a theoretical perspective for a quantitative research, is more on the umbrella of positivism and post-positivism. And for the qualitative research, we have there the interpretivism and critical theory and so on. Next, for the methodology, in a quantitative research, we have the experimental and the non-experimental. For a qualitative research, we have the ethnography, phenomenology. Sometimes we have the participatory action research or PAR. There, we then see PAR, meaning it's critical participatory action research and so on. For the methods, in a quantitative research, we have the parametric and the non-parametric methods. While in a qualitative research or qualitative research, we have the qualitative data collection and analysis. Now, the goal for a quantitative research is more on prediction, test, hypothesis, and while in a qualitative research, we understand and through meaning. Next, for the design, in a quantitative research, we have the structured, predetermined, while in a qualitative research, we have there a flexible and emerging. How about for the sample? For the sample in a quantitative research is large, random, and representation, while in a qualitative research, uh, probably it's small and purposeful. For the data collection in a quantitative research is more on questionnaire, scales, and sometimes tests. For a qualitative research is more on interviews, observation, and also through journal. For the analysis, so we have deductive by statistical method in a quantitative research, while in a qualitative research, we have the inductive by the researcher. And lastly, for findings in a quantitative research, we have the precise and sometimes numeric, while in a qualitative research, we have the comprehensive, the detailed, and holistic. So those are the differences between the quantitative and qualitative researches. Now, talking about the quantitative research, we have these elements that we need to follow according to Crotty in 2003. Starting with epistemology, if you have remembered, okay, a while ago that epistemology of a quantitative research is more on, or it's grounded in the philosophy of objectivism. Next is we have the theoretical research perspective, or sometimes it is called theoretical perspective. So the theoretical perspective in a quantitative research, again, if you have remembered a while ago in the table, we have there under the umbrella of the positivism or post-positivism theories. Then next we have the methodology. Here, the experimental and the non-experimental researches are employed. And the last one is the methods. So these are the four elements according to Crotty should be intertwined and interconnected with each other. All right, to recap about the four elements that interconnected with each other according to Crotty in 2003. So we have first the epistemology. So the epistemology in a quantitative research is more on objectivism. For the theoretical research perspective is more on positivism or post-positivism. For the methodology and methods, all right. But I would like to ask this one. How are these two elements, methodology and methods, are the same? All right. So let's find out. Because actually some of the researchers, these two actually are the misconception of the researcher when they're going to use or when they're going to apply the methodology and when they're going to apply the methods, right? Next, here. So let's find out what is meant of a research methodology versus research methods. When we talk about research methodology, it describes the approaches, kinds, and paradigms of research according to Kaplan in 1973. Kaplan suggests that the aim of methodology is to help us to understand in the broadest possible terms, not the product of scientific inquiry, but the process itself. Example for that are the experimental research, as I mentioned a while ago, and the non-experimental research. While the research methods, so this is now the comparison, the research methods refer to the techniques and procedures used in the process of data gathering by Cohen et al. In 2007. Traditionally, the word refers to those techniques associated with the positivistic model, eliciting responses to predetermined questions, recording measurements, describing phenomena, and performing experiments. So, example for that are pre-test, post-test questionnaires, and so on. Then questionnaires in a form of scaling and so on. So, therefore, research methodology and research methods are somehow different, but they are interconnected with each other. All right? Thus, tonight, we will be focusing only to the quantitative research methods in educational research and its composition. So again, so we're going to focus only to the research methods in educational research and its composition. So we are now down in establishing the research methods. First, we have the research design. Actually, I prepared here only 4 research design for quantitative research. The first one is the descriptive research design. The second one is the correlational research design. The third one is the causal comparative research design. And the fourth one is the experimental research. All of these have the assumptions to follow in order for your study to be more scientific and empirical. So we have to follow all of the assumptions of the 4 research design. So let us talk about the descriptive research design. Descriptive research seeks to describe the current status of an identified variable. These research projects are designed to provide systematic information about a phenomenon. The example topics in which this descriptive research design is applicable are: number one, a description of how second grade students spend their time during summer vacation. Number two, a description of the tobacco use habits of teenagers. And number three, a description of how parents feel about the 12-month school year. Next is the correlational research design. The correlational research attempts to determine the extent of a relationship between two or more variables using statistical data. In this type of design, relationship between and among number of facts are sought and interpreted. This type of research will recognize trends and patterns in data, but it does not go so far in its analysis to prove causes for these observed patterns. The examples are the relationship between intelligence and self-esteem, and the relationship between diet and anxiety. Next is the causal comparative research design. The causal comparative research design, in some books, it is also called a experimental research, attempts to establish cause and effect relationship among the variables. So these type of design are very similar to true experiments, but with some key differences. An independent variable is identified but not manipulated by the experimenter. And effects of the independent variable on the dependent variable are measured. So the researcher does not randomly assign groups and must use ones that are naturally formed or pre-existing groups. So the example of this causal comparative research design, the effect of part-time employment on the achievement of high school students. And number two, the effect of taking multivitamins on students' schools absenteeism. And for the last one, it's the experimental research design. Often called through experiment, uses the scientific method to establish the cause and effect relationship among a group of variables that make up a study. The true experiment is often thought of a laboratory study. Okay, but this is not always the case. A laboratory setting has nothing to do with it. A true experiment is any study where an effort is made to identify and impose control over all other variables except one. So that's the reason. And an independent variable is manipulated to determine the effects on the dependent variables. Subjects are randomly assigned here. Subjects are randomly assigned to experimental treatment rather than identified in natural occurring groups. So the example for that, I have here only one, the effect of a new treatment plan or breast cancer. Now, let's move on to number two, composition, that the sample and the sample size. Of course, we all know that in a study, the sample were taken from the population. But the question is, why we have this sample instead of utilizing the whole population? Well, we use sample because it allows us researchers to conduct our studies with more manageable data and in timely manner, of course. Thus, we can save our time and money. And aside from that, we use samples because they will be the representatives of the population to ensure that we can generalize the findings from the research sample to the population as a whole. So those are the few of the reasons why we have the samples as our respondents instead of a population. So we have here the sample size. I know that some of you are familiar of the Sloven's formula, and maybe some of you had already utilized this in their studies. However, according to Ryan in 2013, this non-parametric formula lacks mathematical rigor because according to him, there is no way to calculate statistical power which tells you how likely your study distinguishes an actual effect from one of chance. So this is now negated by Ryan in 2013. Nowadays, there was a free software actually where you can use online. The name is Rausoft. All right, the name is Rausoft, and it was created to eliminate the stress of calculating sample size into manageable process since the design was created to be users friendly. Okay, users friendly software, just like for example you can add here, as you can see, you can add the 5% error or margin of error. Then next you can also write or add there in the box the 95%. Of course, since we have the 5% error, we have also the 95 confidence interval or level. Then the total population, so assuming that we have 20,000, then with a standard 50% response distribution, and finally, you will get your recommended sample size, which is, again, um, so we have 377. So now the question is, how reliable is this RAWSOF? According to some experts, actually, the RAWSOF database is an extremely robust, proven system that possesses high data integrity and security. Hence, this software called RAWSOF is 100% accurate, reliable, and fast. So you may use this software instead of calculating using the Sloven's formula. However, some researchers use this CLT. CLT stands for the central limit theorem. The central limit theorem states that the distribution of the sample means approximates a normal distribution as the sample size gets larger. So regardless of the population distribution. Here, again, the CLT states that the distribution of the sample means approximates a normal distribution as the sample size gets larger regardless of the population's distribution. So sample sizes equal to or greater than 30. Again, the sample sizes equal to 30, or I mean is equal or greater than 30 for you to say that it's adequate. Okay, because in CLT are oftenly considered sufficient for having this sample 30 or above 30. So thus here are the recommended sample size by Macmillan in 1996 and Frankel in 2012. Like in descriptive, we have 100. In the correlational study, we have 50. Then for the experimental study, we have 15 or 30. The 15 there, it indicates that since supposing in an experimental study we have two groups, so the first group composed of 15 respondents and the other group composed of 15 respondents. So if we're going to add that, that is also equal to 30. So therefore, it's also included in the CLT theorem. And the 30 there, it indicates for only one sample group. Next is for the causal comparative study. So we have there 30. All right. Next, let's move on to number 3, which is the sampling technique. All right, the number 3 is the sampling technique. In sampling technique, we have two kinds. The first one is, I know that you are familiar with this, probability sampling technique and the non-probability sampling technique. Here, In a probability sampling technique, the following are the methods. And for the non-probability sampling technique, the following are the methods for the non-probability sampling. So let's move on. First, in probability sampling, we're going to take up the simple random sampling, or sometimes it is called the fishbowl technique. I know that you are familiar with this, so I will not go into detail how we're going to utilize this simple random sampling. Next, um, next probability sampling is the systematic sampling. Systematic sampling is a probability sampling technique where the researchers select members of the population at the regular, I, I'm going to emphasize this, regular interval. For example, as you can see in the diagram, okay, the researcher picked the second element, then followed by fifth, eighth, and 11. So here, in systematic sampling, we select every nth element in the population to get the sample. So therefore, the nth element there or here is every third regular interval of the population. All right, so that's how are we going to utilize this systematic sampling. However, we have to avoid this one. In systematic sampling, we have to avoid what we call this periodicity. Periodicity meaning it is good to have this idea to randomize the starting point, because sometimes if we utilize the systematic sampling, we usually start from 1. So we're going to avoid that periodicity. So it's also good idea to have a randomized starting point of the sample. So for us to prevent unwanted bias, of course, in sorting or selecting our participants or uh, the participants for the future. Okay. Now, the third one is the stratified sampling. This one is more complicated. So, I want you to listen carefully. Stratified random sampling is a method of sampling that involves dividing a population into a smaller group called strata. In our diagram, the group is divided into 3. As you can see, in our diagram, we have 3 colors, blue, red, and yellow-green. So we have here the stratum 1 composed of 3 members, stratum 2 composed of 6 members, and the stratum 3 composed of 3 members, a total of 12 participants or members. All right? Now, if you wanted to have 4 members as a sample size from the population, so how are we going to determine the number of members to be taken in each stratum? All right? So again, my question is, how are we going to determine the number of members to be taken in each stratum? For example, we have, okay, Y. In stratum 1, we only have 1. And in stratum 2, we have 2. And again, in stratum 3, we have 1. Y. So therefore, we have to use this formula. So the formula here, in the denominator, number of stratum, or that is your n, over the total population, okay, times the expected sample size. So for example, in a stratum 1, so what is the number of stratum? The number in stratum. So we have 3, right? So 3 divided by the total population, which is 12, and then we're going to divide that by our expected sample size, which is 4, and that would be equal to 1. So the same process as we go to stratum 2, that's why we have 2 members taken from stratum 2, and in stratum 3, we have only one member taken. So we have to use that formula. But we have to remember also that the adequate sample size based on the CLT a while ago, the central limit theorem, is 30. The diagram here I shown to you is only a presentation for you to understand the process on determining the sample size using the stratified sampling. All right. Now, in order for you to understand very well, I have here another example of data. For example, at a public high school, the number of students per year are as follows. So freshman, we have 300. Sophomore, we have 400. Junior, 500. Senior, 450. A total of 160, 1,650 students. Now, if your expected sample size is 100, this is now your expected sample size 100, we have to use again the formula to determine the member or members in its stratum. So again, the formula. So for example, in a freshman, so we have there 300, of course, 300 divided by 300 divided by the total population, which is 1,650 times 100. So that is equal to 18.18. But since our respondents are human, we don't have 0.18 human. So we're going to round off to a nearest whole number. All right. So that's why we have here 18. So the same process that we're going to follow in sophomore, junior, senior to come up a sample size of 100. So that's how are we going to use the stratified sampling technique in our study. All right. Next, let's move on. Another probability sampling, the last one is the cluster sampling. Cluster sampling is a probability sampling method in which you divide a population into clusters, such as distinct or schools, and then randomly select some of these clusters as your sample. So here is the diagram. As you can see, we divide our population into 6 clusters. All right, and we select 2 clusters. It depends to us what we're going to use. Again, is it a simple random sampling technique or systematic to determine the 2 cluster sample as our respondents. Next is, all right, so I have now 30 minutes left. A convenience sample is a type of a non-probability sampling method where the sample is taken from the group of people easy to contact. All right, so it's easy to contact or to reach. For example, standing at a mall or a grocery store and asking people to answer questions would be an example of a convenience sampling technique. All right, so that is also called accidental sampling. Next, another one is the purposive or judgment sampling. So here, in the judgment sampling, also called purposive sampling, the sample members are chosen only on the basis of the researcher's knowledge and judgment. It enables you to select cases that will best enable you to answer your research question or questions to meet your objectives. And another is the snowball sampling. So the diagram shows snowball sampling method is purely based on referrals. And that is how a researcher is able to generate a sample. Therefore, this method is also called the chain referral process. So it's a referral, and that is called the snowball sampling technique. And the last one, non-probability sampling, is the quota sampling. The selection of the sample is made by the researcher who decides the quotas for selecting sample from specified subgroups. So for example, the red one, I select that because those are the senior citizen, and I want my respondents to be senior citizens. So I have that in my mind. Then, in this sampling method, we pre-plan the number of participants in specified categories. So I choose 4, okay? Then sample represents each group or stratum of the population. All right. Next, let's move on to a research instrument. So what is research instrument? This is now the fourth composition of the research method. A research instrument is a tool used, okay, to collect, measure, and analyze data related to your subject. Research instruments can be tests, okay, surveys, scales, or questionnaire, or sometimes even checklists. In descriptive research, where the survey methods was utilized, sometimes polls having dichotomous responses, we have this yes or no response. And the Likert scale having different point scales such as 3-point scales, 5 or 7-point scales are usually used in these as a research instruments for this survey. Moreover, in observation survey, such as getting the data in terms of age, shape, weight, height, etc., the numerical data were employed through checklists. Hence, those are or these are the usual research instruments used in descriptive research. In a correlational study or research, it is a study of identifying variables that have some form of relationship to the extent that a change in one variable causes a change in another variable. Thus, the survey is the most common method in a correlational study. The next one is in causal comparative research. This is the cause and effect kind of research. Cause means the reason or action, then while the effect means the results or reaction. In this type of research, investigators attempt to determine the cause or consequences of differences that already exist between or among groups of individuals. It is also known as the ex post facto research. And the research instruments used here in a causal comparative research are the following: questionnaires, pre-test and post-test, various assessments, and sometimes numerical observations. And the last one, in experimental research design, we have this, okay, we have this one group pretest. One group pretest, post-test design, okay, where the pretest was given before the treatment, as you can see, and after the treatment being implemented, the post-test was administered. So aside from having one group, there are also two groups. So we have here, okay, two groups for experimental research, also known as the two-group pre-test post-test design. In this kind of research design, there are two groups. The control group having no treatment, as you can see below, having no treatment involved, and the experimental group having this treatment being implemented to them, the X. Here, okay, there are two kinds of experimental research design, such as the true experimental research design and the quasi-research design. And here are the some of the examples of the true experimental research design and the quasi-experimental research designs. Hence, okay, this experimental research design, the research instruments used are more on pre-test and post-test research questionnaires. Sometimes it is in a form of a multiple choice type of test, and sometimes maybe there are some other questionnaires for this pre-test and post-test for the experimental research. All right, now the goal of establishing here The number 5, we are now down to number 5, which is the validity and the reliability. And the goal of establishing reliability and validity in research is to guarantee that the data is valid and consistent, and that the findings are correct. The evidence of validity and reliability are prerequisites to assure the integrity and quality of a measurement instrument by Kimberlin and Winterstein in 2008. So that was the goal of the reliability and validity of research instrument. So what is this validity? In our table, validity extends to which a test measures and what it claims to measure. While in a reliability, it is the consistency of the test results. All right. Then in a validity measures whether the extent to which the test claims to measure is achieved, and for the reliability measures whether the test gives consistent results to its outcome. And there are two types, validity and reliability, which are the internal validity and internal reliability, at the same time external validity and external reliability. Now, again, let's talk about validity. Validity deals with the degree to which a measures what it claims to measure. Then, test validity is the degree to which test measures what it is supposed to measure. Actually, I only have here two kinds of validity, which I think very essential to the education of research among different kinds of validity. And these are the content validity, and the second one is the criterion related validity. Now, in a content validity, how are we going to use or utilize this content validity in our research? This content validity, it involves the systematic examination of the test content to determine whether it covers a representative sample of the behavior domain it is purported to measure. So here, in content validity, the research instrument could be checked. All right, so if you utilize this content validity, you can invite expert panel of evaluators or experts related or who are knowledgeable of the subjects being studied. All right, and next, here in a content validity, it could also be done by preparing a table of specifications. And note, the closer the test contents to the subject matter, the higher the content validity. So that was the content validity. Now let's move on to the criterion related validity. Now, talking about the criterion related validity, this criterion related validity correlates or compare the test with other existing standards measures or criteria. Criterion related validity looks at the relationship between a test score and outcome. The example is intelligent quotient tests are often validated against measures of academic performance, and that was the criterion. Now, if the test data and criterion data are collected at the same time, this is referred to as concurrent validity evidence. If the new test is validated by a comparison with a currently existing criterion, we have concurrent validity. Okay? Now, if the test data are collected first in order to predict criterion data collected at the later point in time, then this is referred to as predictive validity evidence. And what is predictive validity? Predictive validity measures the degree to which a test accurately depicts on a foretell a criterion that will occur in the future. It refers to the power of usefulness of test scores to predict future performance. Now, how about reliability? Again, reliability has more to do with consistency of the measures, or what shall we say, repeatability. While validity has to do with accuracy, again, reliability is will do more about the consistency. So the term reliability is psychological research refers to the consistency of the research study or measuring test by McLeod in 2013. We have here the types of reliability, the internal and the external. Reliability refers to the extent which, um, which a measure is consistent within itself. Example of a method is that the split half method, which means split half method measures the extent to which all parts of the test contribute equally to what is being measured. Otherwise, the reliability, The external reliability is the extent to which a measure varies from one use to another. The example of this are the following. Test retest measures the stability of a test over time, and the inter-rater to the degree to which different raters give consistent estimates of the same behavior. Some scholars utilize the Cronbach alpha. This Cronbach alpha could be used both in rating scale or achievement tests. And sometimes some scholars use the KR20 or the Coder-Richardson Formula 20, usually used with two dichotomous scores, meaning we have two scores. And here are the table of Cronbach alpha with the corresponding internal consistency. The table shows that the accepted value for Cronbach alpha is within the range of 0.7 to 0.8. All right. Next, we are now down to a data gathering procedure. What is data gathering procedure? The data gathering procedure, or sometimes called the data collection, is the process of gathering and measuring information on variables of interest in an established systematic fashion that enables one to answer stated research questions, test hypotheses, and evaluate outcomes. However, sometimes when the data gathering procedures is quite long, the conceptual framework this conceptual framework actually, the reviewer could easily interpret the flow of the research. What is conceptual framework? A conceptual framework is a written or visual presentation of an expected relationship between variables. Again, if we have this long narration of the data gathering procedure, through conceptual framework, we can easily we can see the flow of the research methods using this conceptual framework. So again, this conceptual framework is written or visually represented on expected relationship between variables. Variables are simply the characteristics or properties that you want to study. The conceptual framework is generally developed based on a literature review of existing studies and theories about the topic. Sometimes, you could also notice, okay, here. So this is now the relationship between two or more variables in a diagram. As you can see, the first diagram, the variable and associated to achievement. As what you have noticed, the line is only a straight line with no arrowhead compared to the second diagram. What factors and lead to pupil achievement? Now let us talk about the first diagram. The first diagram, this is the relationship of variable to achievement, is called associational. So meaning to say, if we have the association or relationship relating one variable to the other, we're going to use this line with no arrowhead. Otherwise, if we use the cause and effect relationship, we have to use this second line with arrowhead, meaning um, the one variable affects the other variable. Sometimes you can also notice in a conceptual framework that there are solid lines and broken lines, isn't it? The solid line represents the direct and indirect pathways, while the dotted lines represents moderation. So we have to consider of those four. Again, the line with no arrowhead, the line with arrowhead, the broken line, and the solid line in a conceptual framework. Again, conceptual framework is the flow of your research. For example of a conceptual framework, so I have here, so the first one, this line indicates lead to because we have this arrowhead. While the other one, these lines are associational because we don't have arrowhead to those lines. Okay? Relationship, and the second one is the cause and effect. Next, we are now down to number 7, the statistical treatment. The term statistical treatment is term which means to apply any statistical method to your data. Treatments are divided into two groups. The descriptive statistics, which summarize your data as a graph or summary, the summary of the statistics, and the inferential statistics, which make prediction and test the hypothesis about your data. In descriptive statistics, it is a summary of statistics that quantitatively describes or summarizes features from a collection of information, while descriptive statistics is the process of using and analyzing those statistics by Wikipedia in 2022. Four major types of descriptive statistics. We have here the following: measure of frequency, the measure of central tendency, measure of dispersion or variation, and the measures of position. Four major types of descriptive statistics. When we are talking about the measures of frequency, we have here the frequency count, the percentage, and then the frequency. Next, for the measures of central tendency, we have the mean, the median, and the mode. Next, if we're going to use the measures of the dispersion, we have the range, the variance, and the standard deviation. While in a measures of position, we have the percentile rank and the quartile rank. Let's move on to the inferential statistics. Inferential statistics is the process of using data analysis to infer properties of underlying distribution of probability. Inferential statistical analysis infers properties of a population. For example, by testing the hypothesis and delivering estimates by Wikipedia in 2022. So we have here the null hypothesis compared to the alternative hypothesis. Then, we also have to consider the parametric test and the non-parametric test. Now, when we're going to use this parametric test and when we're going to use this non-parametric test. And of course, here, for the inferential statistics, the margin of error, the type 1 error, or the A or alpha, is equal to 0.05, having the 95% confidence interval or level. Now I have here the table comparing the parametric and the non-parametric tests. But anyway, we're going to discuss that. So let's move on because I already have limited time. Parametric test assumptions versus the non-parametric test assumption. When we are talking about the parametric test assumption, the normally distributed is the number one assumption for the parametric test. Then the samples are randomly chosen. Then another sample size is large. Again, how are we going to determine that the sample size is adequate? So using the CLT. Then the variance must be equal. The values are both measured in interval or ratio scale, and at least no outliers. So those are the assumptions for the parametric test. Otherwise, if we don't have those assumptions from the parametric test, we consider the non-parametric test. So let's move on first to the normal distribution of data. How are we going to determine that the data are normal? So the first one is the skewness and kurtosis. So within the range, so actually I have here our basis is within the range of negative 1.96 excuse me, to 1.96. So first we have to look for the skewness. As you can see in the table, the skewness is equal to negative 0.23, negative 0.230 divided by, you're going to divide that to 0.427. So that is equal to 0.54. Next, we're going to focus also to the kurtosis. So we have there negative 0.283 divided by to 0.833. The answer there is 0.34. As you can see, both quotients of skewness and kurtosis are within negative 1.96 to 1.96. Therefore, the data is normally distributed. Okay? If we have the if we're going to consider the normal distribution of the data using the skewness and kurtosis. Next, how about this one? Now, if we're going to divide comparing the skewness and kurtosis, I will not go into detail, but here both quotients of skewness and kurtosis exceeded, okay, exceeded within the range of negative 1.96 to 1.96. Therefore, the data is not normally distributed. All right, since the results or the quotients exceeded to within the range. Another one, for us to test the normality of the data is using this table. Okay. As you can see, test of normality, we're going to consider the Shapiro-Wilk. It is more appropriate method to a small size, small size, meaning is less than 50 samples, the Shapiro-Wilk. As you can, although it can also be handling on larger sample size, while Kolmogorov-Smirnov is used for n, or the sample size which is greater than 50, okay, or equal to 50 or greater than 50. So we have to use this Kolmogorov-Smirnov. Note, if the p-value, please go to the p-value, that is the significant. If the significant or the probability value, the sig, that is the p-value, is greater than the set alpha, which is 0.05, then the data is normally distributed. Otherwise, the if the p-value is less than or lower than 0.05, then the data is normally distributed. So therefore, if the data is normally distributed, you have to use the parametric test. Otherwise, if not normally distributed, so you have to utilize the non-parametric test. Other method used to determine if the data are normally distributed using this histogram. The first one is normally distributed since we have this bell shape like of the histogram. While the second one is not normally distributed because it's skewed to the right. Yes, or positively skewed. So therefore, the left side is you have to utilize the parametric, while the right side you have to utilize the non-parametric. Then the other factor for you to determine if parametric or not, using this randomly using this sampling technique. I mean, the sampling technique. If your sampling technique, you if your sampling technique is within the probability sampling, then you have to use the parametric test. Otherwise, if your sampling technique is within the non-probability sampling, such as convenience, purposive, quota, and snowball, you have to use the non-parametric test. All right, and you can also have this adequate sample size. Again, the adequate sample size is 30 and above because of the CLT. So if below 30, so you have to utilize the non-parametric test, I mean. But above 50, so you have to utilize the parametric test. Another one is the variance, homogeneity of the variance, the Levens test for the equality of the variance. Here, I will show to you the variance. Here, you can see the Levens test for equality of variance. If you have you can see this if you're going to if you're going to manipulate the independent sample t-test. Here, the probability, okay, since the p-value is greater than the set alpha, which is 0.05, therefore the variance is homogeneous, okay, since greater. Otherwise, so we have to use the parametric. Otherwise, if, all right, the p-value is lower than the set alpha, which is 0.05, so therefore the variance is heterogeneous. So we have to use the non-parametric test. Okay. Next, this one is in the test of ANOVA. So again, if greater, parametric. If lower, so non-parametric. All right, next, values are both in intervals and ratio. So here, the nominal scale and the ordinal scale, sometimes we call that as a qualitative or a categorical data. So we have that nominal scale and ordinal scale. While in a quantitative or numerical data, we have the interval scale and the ratio scale. For example, are the following. Now, in a qualitative data or a categorical data, we have to use the non-parametric test. All right? And if your data is in the scale of interval or ratio, or shall we say a numerical data, so we have to use the parametric test. Then another factor we have to consider is no significant outlier. This one is the box, okay? No outlier. However, as you can see in the diagram, there are outliers. So therefore, if there are outliers above, so you have to utilize non-parametric test. If none, then you have to utilize the parametric test. Then Next is the homoscedasticity and linearity. In regression analysis, homoscedasticity means a situation in which the variance of the dependent variable is the same for all the data, the variance, okay? Homoscedasticity facilitates analysis because most methods are based on the assumption of equal variance. Okay, homoscedasticity, equal variance, and the linear relationship or linear association is a statistical term used to determine a straight line relationship between two variables. So homoscedasticity, for example, we have here in our statistics using the SPSS tool. This one is homoscedasticity. Yes, because the distance from the center are approximately equal. Have you seen that? Compare this graph. As you can see, the distance from the center are not equal. So therefore, this is now not homoscedasticity. So the first one, you have to use parametric. The second one, you have to use the non-parametric. Another, linearity. As you can see, both are linear. Why linear? Because it goes up positively. So linearity, yes, both of them are linear. But homoscedasticity, no. The first one is homo, but the other one is hetero. Next, for homoscedasticity and linearity, combining the two. How about this one? Talking about the homoscedasticity, as I mentioned a while ago, this one is not, right? And how about the linearity? Of course, that is also not. So therefore, you have to utilize the non-parametric test. So this diagram you can use or you can see that using your SPSS tool. And the last one is the ethical issue. So what are ethical considerations in research? The ethical considerations in research are the set of principles that guide your research designs and practices. So these principles include voluntary participation, okay, voluntary participation. You have your informed consent, anonymity, confidentiality, potential for harm, and results communication. So I have here the sample of a consent form that you're going to use uh, for your respondents. For the summary, so there are 8 components that we need to include in our quantitative research methods. Of course, in educational research, they are the following: research design, the sample size, the sampling technique, research instruments, validity and reliability of research instruments, data gathering procedure. You can also show the conceptual framework, and the statistical analysis, and the last one, the ethical issues. And here are my reference in this report. So it ends my presentation. Thank you so much for listening. For any question, you can find me in this um, email ad. Sir?
Thank, thank you very much, sir, for your outstanding presentation you share with our participants. It's really amazing, sir. Thank you very much.
Sir? Yes, sir.
Dear participants, today we have no quiz competition, so let's proceed to our question and answer session. After a short video clips, we come back together with our speaker again. Thank you. Welcome back, sir. Dear participants, it's our question and answer session time. You can send your question in our comment box and make sure to put it one by one so that our speaker understand it well. Sir, are you ready to answer the question? Sir, can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay, sir. Sir, in the comment box, lots of free comment for you. Thank you so much,
Yes.
sir, sharing. Thank you for a wonderful sharing. Thank you very much for a comprehensive presentation and Carmilla Vizian. Thank you so much, sir, sharing for the sharing. What a full lesson. Actually, sir, today's presentation is very important for the participants. I hope they will benefit from you.
You, thank you so much for that appreciation.
So, dear participants, if you have any question, you can freely ask. Sir, our first question. Hello, Sir Sherwin. What do you think is the best sampling technique to be used for a qualitative research? And thank you.
Thank you so much for that question. Actually, my topic is more on a quantitative research, but I can also um, answer that since you have that question for me. I think the best sampling technique that you're going to utilize in a qualitative research is more on a purposive sampling because purposive sampling, as I mentioned a while ago, you the this is based on the research judgment. So you as a researcher, you already know who will be your potential participants. So I think that is the best sampling technique that you're going to employ in your qualitative research. However, just like for example, if you want to study which is more confidential, just like um, person a person infected with this disease, HIV or AIDS. So I think maybe the snowball sampling technique, which is the referral, meaning the first person that you know most that he or she has this disease, HIV or AIDS, can refer to you the other respondent for you to have these adequate respondents for your study. But anyway, it depends on your study. So you can actually use the four as what I mentioned a while ago. But for me, the purposive sampling technique is really the the best sampling technique for a qualitative research. Yes.
Thank you, sir. Our next question from Rohini Gonzaga. What other software can be substituted for SPSS?
As so far as I have no idea for the other software, but when I watch that in a video, sometimes some of the statisticians, I mean, use this Microsoft Excel instead of a SPSS tool. But you can also solve that in our basic research, in our high school research. You can also solve the mean, the standard deviation, but it takes time for us. So it's if if you have your tool, the SPS tool, you can use for you to save your time and of course your effort.
Thank you, sir. Our next question. Good evening, Sir Sherwin. Is hypothesis necessary in using in a quantitative research?
Hypothesis actually it's only for, as I've read in an article and a book or some references, the hypothesis is only intended if you have these research questions which is more on inferential. All right. So if your research question is more on, or you don't have these inferential questions, so you don't need to have this hypothesis in your study. What I'm telling to say is, if you have this descriptive research only with no um, inferential analysis to be utilized for research questions, then you don't need to have this hypothesis testing in your study.
Thank you, sir. Our next question is what is the importance of describing the participants of the study in research?
Describing the participants, as I've mentioned, this is in descriptive research. It's more on we are describing the attributes, the features of participants. Just like, for example, in a demographic profile, if we are referring to the male and female, so what are the characteristics or attributes that they differ from each other?
Thank you, sir. Our next question from Albin. Hello, Sir Shermin. How can we freely access SPSS? And thank you.
Actually, I don't know, but because my co-teacher, the SPSS tool was on shared by me. I don't know where she get this, but some of the tool SPSS have the license, so you have to purchase this SPSS tool online. Or if you have your friends or your teachers or your or some of your colleagues there that have this SPSS tool, maybe you can have that one.
Thank you, sir. Our next question from Joshua. Good evening, Sir Sherwin. May I ask, sir, if what is the reliable statistical tool for testing significant differences?
Reliable statistical tool, significant differences. It depends. Significant difference if you're comparing the two independent samples. So if this is a parametric independent sample, so you have the independent sample t-test, and the non-parametric equivalent of this um, independent sample t-test is the Mann-Whitney, if I'm not mistaken. Yes, the Mann-Whitney. And if you're going to compare the relevant of these variables, meaning with relationships. So, for example, the relevant variables, for example, you have this pre-test and then post-test, then you have to utilize the paired sample t-test, all right? And the non-equivalent, non-parametric for the paired sample t-test is the Wilcoxon sign random test.
Thank you, sir. Our next question, Sir Sherwin. What is the most appropriate research methodology in mixed methods research? Studied respondents and ideal number.
Actually, when we talk about the mixed methods research, it composed of the two methods, the quantitative and the qualitative research methods. So according to Croswell, The most appropriate research methodology, um, uh, the research methodology, because as I mentioned a while ago, when we are talking about the methodology, the from the epistemology to theoretical research perspective down to the methodology, they should be interconnected with each other. All right. Now, if we're talking about the methodology for the mixed method research, I think it's more on a pragmatic, but what I can tell you is only the design in that methodology, which is what we call the sequential exponent. What, I forgot the name. The sequential narrative. Just like that. Let me search. Actually, it's behind my topic, but let me check first for how sequence. It's more on sequential mixed method research, but there is a exact term for that. Okay. Ex- uh, seq- uh, Exploratory sequential, the correct term, I remember. The exploratory sequential, because that is the methods of a research where you're going to, first you have to you have to process first the quantitative methods of research. Then after you have this quantitative research method, how are you going to apply this quantitative research in your in the qualitative research method? So that is the, I forgot the name already. The exploratory sequential mixed method research design. Exploratory sequential.
Thank you. Sir, our next
Yes.
question from Muhammad Selim Mia. The result of research cannot be expressed in numbers or quantity. It's called qualitative research, is not it?
Yes, it's more on the quantitative research is more on numbers. Otherwise, um, otherwise it's a qualitative research.
Thank you. Our next question. What research method would you suggest for a research which you are trying to gauge the impact of a certain program or to a large population?
If we're talking about the impact, so meaning it has a relationship, right? So if you heard my presentation a while ago, if we are focusing about the relationship, I think it is more on a correlational research design or study.
Our next question. We are still experiencing the impact of pandemic event in naming a research. My question is, can we combine the online or is e-survey to a traditional survey face to face?
Let me check first. Let me read. Good evening, sir. We are still experiencing the impact of pandemic even in me naming a research. Or what is that? My question is, can we combine the online or e-survey to the traditional survey to face? I think you you cannot, because there is a category for that. So meaning the data that you have from online would be different to the data that you have in survey data in face to face. So you have to differentiate the category, because in, I think in the method section you have to um, explain detail that this data you have, because if the your research advisor will check that in the method, so you already mentioned that in your method sections that you have this data online and you have this data in face to face. So I think you cannot um, change that. By the way, the previous question a while ago regarding with the impact, if it is more on relationship it's only for two variables involved. But if you have this more than two, so regression analysis will be useful also.
Thank you very much, sir, for answering a lot of questions.
Oh, yes.
Thank you very much, sir. We hope we will meet
Thank you.
together in another session in ICP platform. Today's session also
Uh,
very effective and informative. Thank you, sir.
you're welcome, and thank you so much also for that. Anyway, you can also check. Maybe I'm the right person, or my answer to you is not convinced, or please correct if my answer is wrong, or you can search that. But I'm actually I'm some of my answers are 100% sure. Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Dear participants, today our program name is Quantitative Research Method in Educational Research, and the code is IGP 0398. IGP 0398. I hope today's webinar is very helpful for you. And thank you very much for making this webinar wonderful. And we hope we will meet together tomorrow at the same time. Thank you very much.